In emergency management, the definition of a stakeholder is any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival or recovery of a given community.
This is the Stakeholder Prepping Podcast, where the tactical comes from the practical, and today, you become your own stakeholder.
Here are your hosts, Chris and AC.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you, yes, you are the stakeholder in your own survival. And, this is part 2 of our 2-part Prepper Myths episode. And these are the ones that these myths made it to this second round because they are just so stubborn and will not go away. You know what I mean?
No, exactly. These are like the coffee ring on the coffee table myths. No matter how hard you scrub, they just won't go away.
Yeah, you're going to take the finish off before you get rid of the stain. So
Yeah,
I know last week we ran over which topics. Last week we went over the battery myth, which we pretty effectively busted, the lone wolf fallacy that we busted.
Yep.
Ammo as your only prep. You're going to get shot in the face before you go through half of it. And tampons in bullet wounds.
Yeah,
Not a good idea.
Those were the 4 that we busted last week, and those were the easier ones. Although I see those myths every day popping up online still. But these ones, the 4 today, are pretty tough. These myths won't go away. But I will say that these myths, there is some validity to all of them. And I think that's a big part of it, is that we do need to recognize when there are valid points within some of these myths. And I think that's why a lot of them just won't die. But yeah, we're going to go over specifically what's valid within these, and then just the fluff and sensationalism and all those kinds of things about why they should just die. So, yeah, do you want to go back and forth on these, Chris? I can start.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do the same thing as last time. Go ahead and kick us off. And where are we going first?
So this one we've actually addressed in its own episode because it's such a big deal, but the EMP is the biggest threat that we should be preparing for. That is the myth that needs busting. And like I said, I think it was episode 58 we did on this. We really dug into the science behind this one. But saying an EMP isn't a huge risk to humanity is a bold take in the prepping community. People just don't like that take, where
Yeah.
I guess that EMP apocalypse is practically its own subgenre of fiction. And we all read like 1 second after. So I get why, because it's a really cool, spooky topic that, you really can't prepare for. It's just this all-encompassing thing that's just, no matter what you do, the EMP is going to take it down. And I think that's why people gravitate towards it. But it's just not as big of an issue as I think a lot of people want it to be. And while the EMP, the electromagnetic pulse, is a real physical phenomenon, there are several grounded, logical reasons why it might not deserve the number 1 spot on your risk matrix. And so let's break this down a little bit. And like I said, if you want to listen to this topic for an hour, we did a whole episode on it. But let's give you the key talking points of why that EMP boogeyman might be a little overblown compared to other risks. So
Yeah, this is the monster under the bed for every prepper.
it absolutely is. I think EMP, I mean, nuclear proliferation, is probably the one that, like, World War III, nukes flying everywhere. I think that's probably right up there. But EMP is real close. And you see this daily. I think there are people every day that are solely preparing for the EMP. So let's talk about a couple of the reasons why this just doesn't deserve that number 1 spot on your risk matrix. And maybe we'll change some hearts and minds here, but there's what we call the perfect shot problem. And I'm going to break this down. For that high altitude EMP, the hemp, which is the only thing that can really take all this stuff down, to be truly devastating, a localized nuclear blast just isn't enough. So, an attacker, and I'm going to say it's got to be a nation state. This isn't something some rogue terrorist can do. This has to be a real uh, civilized and technologically advanced nation state would need to detonate a nuclear warhead at a specific altitude above 20 miles, at least above the country, and usually a lot higher than that, even like up to like 400 miles, to interact with the Earth's electromagnetic field correctly. And by correctly, I mean the bad way. And this is way higher than an airplane can fly. So the complexity of this is just pretty hard to fathom, as it requires a sophisticated delivery system like an intercontinental ballistic missile, and it requires super precise timing. So launching, this is a nuke, right? Launching a nuclear missile for an EMP is still a nuclear launch. And what that means is the MAD doctrine applies, the mutually assured destruction doctrine applies. And that's actually what MAD gear stands for. I didn't know that until we asked Sam, but
Yeah.
it's mutually assured destruction. So the MAD doctrine applies. And what that means is if a nation is willing to go nuclear, a direct strike on a city is just a way more likely gamble than this atmospheric pulse. It's basically wasted weapon theory, because what you're doing is you are attacking with a nuke. This is nuclear war. You're declaring nuclear war. But instead of using this cool nuke against a hardened military target or a big populated area or Washington, D.C., what you're doing is magically getting it way higher in the atmosphere than an airplane could go, and then detonating it at the exact right altitude and time to mess all this stuff up for us, except our military. Because as we talked about, the military has all this hardened gear. It's really not going to affect military aircraft and things like that. And if you listen to our episode with Sam from Mad Gear, I think that was episode 70, was it? Yeah. If you listen to that episode, he has a really good, educated take on this as he flew aboard the E-6B Mercury Doomsday plane. Like, he was a comms officer on this, and he knows more about our deterrence and countermeasures and our second strike capabilities than he was even allowed to talk about. But we did get him chatting a little bit after he went off air. And after our conversation with him, EMP went way further down on my risk matrix than even was before, because we had our ideas, Chris, of what an EMP would do or how likely it was and those kinds of things. And then hearing it from Sam after we didn't coach him, he just kind of had the exact same things to say as us. And so I was like, okay, we're on the right track here. It really is just so unlikely. And this is a guy who flew on the Doomsday plane, the TACAMO, which I think is a really cool acronym too, by the way. It's like, it's take charge and move out. Is that what
Yep.
TACAMO?
Take
That's
charge
just
and
cool.
move out.
We should take charge and move out. We should do a whole episode on just really cool military acronyms.
We could definitely do that.
There's just some
I
cool ones that I like.
I did like how you brought up the 20 miles altitude, because to
It's
put this in
far.
perspective, I mean, commercial airliners, they're between 28 and 35,000 feet most of the
Sure.
time. Would you agree with that, being a
Ye-
pilot?
Yeah. And a lot of, obviously a lot of military aircraft can go higher, but maybe 50, 60, 70,000 feet, but not
105,000 feet is
It's-
20 miles.
it's way, and yeah, exactly. And we're talking about maybe 400 miles in some cases. So that's one. There's also this inverse square law, and that's kind of the electronics fire myth, and it kind of ignores basic physics a lot. The intensity of an EMP's field strength decreases significantly with its distance from the burst. And remember, we talked about the Starfish Prime incident in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
This was a massive nuke, bigger than a lot of nukes that are in service today, and it was a few hundred miles away from Hawaii. So yeah, right by that thing, I bet the EMP was pretty darn intense. But in Hawaii, in the 60s, it didn't stop a single car. Not a single vehicle stopped working. A couple of streetlights went out. I mean, that's not super catastrophic if you ask me. But like cars didn't stop working. This is in the 60s before we had a lot of shielding. Now we really understand EMI and EMF, and we understand a lot more about what would happen. And because of that, things like our vehicles and our cell phones, they're just a lot more shielded naturally. So that's the other biggest thing is just modern electronics are naturally somewhat shielded by the metal casings, or they're just simply too small to act as an effective antenna for this pulse. They don't act as that long line conductor. And so let's talk about like your grid versus the phone sort of argument. So while the power grid is highly vulnerable due to miles of these conducted antennas. This is the long line conductors. Your handheld radios, your laptops, um, your phones, they just have a much higher chance of survival than people really think. EMPs travel along these long conductors like power lines and even plumbing, which is kind of wild. But a ton of electronics, like your vehicle, would likely be unaffected due to the shielding and the insulation. And then lastly, I just want to talk about probability versus impact. When we talk about what this would actually mean to us, prepping is often a game of risk, right? So risk equals probability times impact. This is the basic math of the risk we keep droning on about, right? This is the risk matrix. So an EMP, it would have a high impact, but it's an extremely low probability compared to things that are high probability, high impact, like a grid failure or a cyber attack or a really significant weather event. So investing 80% of your budget into Faraday cages and tube powered radios might leave you vulnerable to the much more likely scenarios, like civil unrest or multi-week power outages or weather events or massive cyber attacks and things like that. So when you're prepping for this very low probability event, you're leaving your risk matrix wide open for all of these high probability events, right? And then I will talk a little bit about the CME. I think that's the other one. People just go, well, okay, not an EMP, but a CME because the Carrington event.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
That's nature's EMP.
That's nature's EMP, right? That is the EMP's slightly less understood cousin is the CME. And if you're worried about the grid, a CME like a solar flare is much more realistic, but it's not a geopolitical gamble, right? It is a bit of a natural certainty at some point, and it affects the same infrastructure like transformers and long line transmission conductors and things like that. But we would get a lot better warning. We always see this on the news, right? Where they're like, "Oh, there's solar flare activity in this cycle," and if we were going to have a real big CME event, we would have probably a couple of days due to satellite observation. We would have a pretty good window. So I will wrap it up by saying an EMP event isn't fake, but it's often used as this fear porn to sell expensive gear. And Chris and I aren't selling anything. We're not selling you the EMP shield for your vehicle or the whatever the magic breaker box for your house and all this kind of stuff. We're just trying to present the facts here. And if you prep for a long-term power outage, no matter the cause, it doesn't matter, then you are already 90% prepared for an EMP without needing to line your entire house with copper mesh. And you are going to be more prepared for these far more likely, far more devastating events. So I'm not saying EMP is not going to happen. I'm just saying that the likelihood is so incredibly low compared to all the other things that would have the same impact or a higher impact.
I completely agree. And I do want to correct you on one thing,
Hmm.
because in fact, we are selling something. You can always get our TACNAV cards on
Okay, that's true.
stakeholderprepping.com.
That's true.
And
But we're not secret about it. We're not like, oh, an EMP is going to happen, so go buy this thing that we somehow magically get paid for. I think we're
right.
pretty out in the open about some of the gear that we brought to the table that we make very little money on. This is all for fun. Same thing with our shirts. Although that would be kind of cool. What if we did like an EMP proof T-shirt? You know, like like the
Yeah,
shirt
we
wouldn't
could
be
definitely do
affected.
that.
It wouldn't be affected by an EMP. We could promise that probably. The EMP wouldn't mess
I'm
with your.
I'm pretty sure that we could get away with that.
I think
Yeah,
we could
we could
probably,
do
yeah,
that.
it's your 100% cotton blend shirt would not be affected by an EMP. We could make an EMP certified shirt probably. Anyway, so, but yes, you're right. Yeah, we do sell some stuff, but it's all cool. It's all cool stuff. What do you have? What was your
Uh,
first one in this round robin of
s-
four?
so this is one that we see all the time, and it's annoying. It won't go away. It won't just go to bed. If SHTF Teotihuacan happens, I can just hunt or grow my own food.
Oh man, and we addressed this a little bit in I think the bug out location episode, didn't we? Just a tiny bit.
A little bit,
I
a
think we
very
did.
little bit.
Yeah, so break this down for us then.
Yeah, this is the mountain man fantasy. You grab a rifle, a packet of heirloom seeds, and disappear into the woods. And it's one of the most dangerous myths in the prepping community. It feels like it's rugged and self-reliant and sexy, and I'm a superhero. But mathematically and biologically, this is a recipe for starvation. If
I
you
just I just googled mountain man fantasy. That's not what came up.
you might want to turn your safe search back on. So the here's why this like mountain man hunter gatherer plan fails under pressure. It's great at the beginning, but let's start with the math of the great deer disappearance, right?
Okay.
Many people assume the woods are just this infinite pantry. There's mushrooms everywhere, and there's deer and elk and wild pigs. And if I want bacon, I'll just go out of my tent, shoot a pig, and make bacon. They're not. If the grocery stores go dark, every person with a Remington 700 is headed to the woods. And I think AC broke the math down for us on our bug out location episode. I think that's where we're getting that from. But here are the hard numbers, right? The U.S. deer population, approximately 30 million. The U.S. human population, approximately 340 million. So when you look at the ratio there, there's roughly one deer for every 11 people. And then all of the deer are gone. So you get 1/11th of a deer. You get like one hawk of deer. Um, and that's why we get hunting licenses and only hunt in certain seasons, because if we don't, the population can collapse. If we hunt while the wildlife is procreating, it's game over. That's if you poach during breeding season, that's a big no-no for DNR and wildlife. We can assume that one deer provides enough meat to supplement a person's diet for about a month under heavy rationing, right? And this is not some record-setting 530 pounds after it's been dressed deer. This is your average 110-pound, if it's a big mule deer, 110-pound deer.
Sure. These are your muleys, your blacktails, just your standard off the not the Texas ranch deers that have been fed like a billion kcals of protein and they've got giant racks that look like a chandelier.
Yeah, exactly. This is your 60-pound whitetail,
Mhm.
and that's 1 month if you're rationing heavily. And if every American decides to hunt, within the first week, the deer population would be decimated. And within the first 30 days, deer would be functionally extinct in the continental US. That's
That's
a
crazy.
terrifying thought.
That's heavy. Yeah, that's wild to think about.
Yeah, and we something pretty cool about this, we actually have historical context with this argument. During the Great Depression, The deer population in a lot of states was hunted nearly to extinction because people were hungry. And that was a much smaller human population and functioning supply chains still providing some bread and grain to help supplement the deer. And we still almost wiped them out. Look
Wow,
at,
that's the math of extinction. I love
yeah,
that.
if you look at how we, as United States humans, how we treated the bison population in the 1800s, we effectively exterminated all bison across the plains. And that wasn't even for food. That was just because we didn't like them.
But they are
So
delicious.
we are good at killing things. Um, there's also what's called the calorie deficit trap. When you're sitting on your couch playing Call of Duty, you're burning way fewer calories than if you were living in the forest and hunting for your next meal. And hunting, gathering, all of this is high energy activities. So the burn versus reward math. And I know I'm doing a lot of math here, but hopefully you're following along.
Yeah, this all makes sense so far. I get it. I mean, this all makes sense. So, okay, burn versus reward. I think you're going to talk about how many calories it takes to actually hunt versus sitting in and ordering DoorDash.
Exactly. So tracking a deer or clearing land for a garden. Those are going to burn between 3,000 and 5,000 calories a day, right? A squirrel is about 300 calories, and they're kind of greasy, kind of gamey, but they'll still get the job done. But a squirrel is about 300 calories. A rabbit is about 1,000. But if you rely solely on that lean wild game like rabbits or deer without a source of fat or carbohydrates, you can actually starve to death with a full stomach. This
That's
is what
crazy.
this is what we saw in North Korea with Rex rabbits being bred for meat. It's called protein poisoning, and your body basically needs fats to process protein. And wild game is notoriously lean. You need some sort of uh, milk for the fats in it, or butter, or something besides just wild game.
Okay, so let's say I'm like, all right, I don't want to hunt at all then. I'm just gonna make a garden.
Ah, you are talking about the great gardening delusion.
Okay.
And I I'm just gonna grow a garden. It sounds easy until you try it. There is a huge learning curve. Most modern people can't keep a succulent alive, let alone an acre of calorie dense crops like corn, potatoes, beans. I mean, a single blight or a swarm of locusts or a late frost or the scarecrow that just doesn't scare away the crows, you're done. You're you're going to starve. And that's also part of the calorie problem because you can't survive on lettuce and tomatoes. You can for a meal, sure. That's a great salad, and it's probably going to taste awesome that it came from your garden. You put all that work in, and now you get to reap the rewards. But to sustain a family, you need staple crops. To grow enough potatoes and corn to last a winter, you need massive amounts of space and fertilizer, which won't be at the store anymore, and physical labor that most people aren't conditioned for. And security, you have to provide security on your stationary target called your garden. If you were the only one with corn within a 5 mile radius, you're not a farmer, you're a target. That's and not just by marauders and scavengers, but by nature itself. AC, I know you do quite a bit of gardening. I mean, how is your relationship with nature and deer trying to get at your corn?
Nature's evil. And the deer got in. I had a deer fence and it stopped the deer, but it doesn't stop the elk. Did you know that an elk fence and a deer fence are two completely different fences?
Uh-uh.
So deer go over things, elk go through things. So I kept the deer out, then the elk came in. So then I put up this massive, like 8 foot tall, 2x4 no climb with 6x6 PT in the ground. And I'm like, okay, I'm good now. None of those, deers and elk are going to get in. And now my relationship with the local crow syndicate is just is just terrible. I'm not paying them their hush money, and they just take everything. There are some. I have probably 5 completely mature cherry trees and a number of cherry trees that do produce some amount of cherries. So I probably have maybe a dozen total. The last couple of years, I don't think I got a single cherry just because of when they got ripe and where I happened to be in the world. I just wasn't home to, assassinate the local bird population, and they ate every single cherry. So I could go on and on about this relationship with nature. Now, obviously, if this is what I was doing full time, yeah, I would be able to keep nature at bay a little better. But it's not easy. It's not just plant it and it will grow and you will eat it. That's not how it works.
No, nature is the original gangsta. It's
Nature is. It is. I have an entire crow syndicate that will just they remember, right? They're you can't get rid of them. It's crazy.
yeah. And you with all of that, you have to remember kind of the one bad day rule when you're doing any type of gardening or hunting. I mean, in a survival situation, a minor injury that can become a death sentence real quick. Infection, getting a scratch from a thorn while you're gathering firewood, that can turn into sepsis without antibiotics. Mobility, if you break an ankle while you're, rolling a tire over for a raised bed, you can't hunt. If you can't hunt, you don't eat. And sanitation, without any sort of modern waste system, waterborne illnesses like dysentery, cholera, those are going to become real killers. Historically, more people died from the runs than starvation or combat.
It's so crazy to
That's
think
scary
about.
to think about, right?
Yeah.
So, the realistic alternative to this, I'm going to grow and hunt and be awesome. The preppers who survive aren't the ones living off the land. They are the ones who built a community. And true survival is about stored calories, like having a year's worth of rice and beans and fats before the crisis hits. Trading, your trading skills, being the person who can fix shoes or weld or provide medical care. That's going to go a long way in that community. And having a local defense network, working with neighbors to protect a local area rather than being that lone wolf in the woods. We already busted the lone wolf. We're doing it again. That one is put to bed, nail in the coffin, done.
Yeah, it's so true that without modern technological advancements in farming, you just need a lot more land per person. And I did the math recently that in the US, and I know we have listeners everywhere, so we always do this, or like go back to the US, but let's just say you can extrapolate this data if you're Canadian. But in the US, there's about 390 million acres of like farmland that you could really make gardens with and grow livestock on, all this kind of stuff. There's about 390 million really good acres that are, you know, cultivable. I don't even know what the word is.
Arable?
Arable. Let's say arable acres. Let's say there's 390 million of those. There are about 350 million people. So that's about 1.1 acre per person. You need about an acre per person. So that math kind of checks out, except most of those 390 million acres are in the Midwest, and most of the people are in the Southwest or Northeast. So it just doesn't work out. You're going to have some kind of crazy, massive die off, and the math just doesn't work if all 350 million people say, I'm just going to grow and or hunt my own food. It just doesn't work. You need that community-based farming and sustainable hunting and those technological advancements that have happened in just the modern farming juggernaut. Otherwise it's just not going to work.
Yeah, and that's per person. So when a small community has a garden and has the capability to store foods, it becomes a force multiplier, and we've talked about that multiple
100%.
times. Uh,
100%.
yeah, a force multiplier should be right up there next to your risk matrix. What can I do that makes the sum of the parts greater than the whole?
Yeah, and like the cattle is a perfect example of that. Like one person with 1 acre, you just can't have a cow, and it's kind of hard to have an eighth of a cow. But if you have your 8 neighbors and you have 8 acres of arable land, then you could have some amount of cattle on this land for you all to share. And so that community thing is just going to be so imperative if you're thinking you can just go grow and hunt your own food.
Yep. Exactly. So, what do you have next on this myth list?
Yeah.
What are you going to
Okay.
bust next?
Okay, man. I can't believe we're still talking about this one, but this made it into the second round because people are crazy. Um, this I don't know. I've talked about this so much and it still just won't die. But the myth that I can simply hide my heat from a thermal imager with a Mylar blanket. And we talked about this a little bit on our, IR 101 episode. But here's the thing, you just can't. It doesn't work. I am personally an internationally recognized subject matter expert on the tactical uses of thermal imaging, and you cannot hide yourself from a thermal imager with a Mylar blanket. And this is one of the most dangerous myths in the tactical prepping world because it gives people a false sense of invisibility. They're like, "Yeah, man, I've got a Mylar blanket or even a tarp or whatever it is, and I'm just gonna hide from the Russian drones when they come to blow me up." It's just not gonna work. If you wrap yourself in a Mylar blanket thinking you're predator proof, you're actually just turning yourself into a very shiny, very obvious target for anyone with a decent thermal optic. And that's something that I think perpetuates this myth, the indecent thermal optic, if you will. I
Okay.
think I think a lot of people have a small, cheap thermal imager and they did an experiment on their own and came to this conclusion. I see them a lot online. The analogy I would use is something like if you had a 25 ACP in your Saturday Night Special Lorson handgun and you tried to shoot 1,000 yards and you couldn't, then you tell everyone that, hey, a bullet will not go 1,000 yards because I tried it myself. That's,
Okay.
does that make
I
sense?
see where you're at, where your head is at with that.
It,
Yeah.
and you can tell how old I am because my Saturday Night Special is a Lorson. Like I grew up before High Point. Like I didn't have a High Point growing up. It was a Lorson was my 25 ACP or my 380. But yeah, that's what it is. It's if you have the wrong tool for the job, then you're going to say the tool doesn't work. Does that make sense?
It does. And that's a really good point because I can go online and buy a thermal imager from Amazon for under $100.
For sure. Yeah.
And I'm gonna walk around my house and it's gonna show me where the walls are and it's gonna show me where the dogs are, and then I'm gonna try to look at jet streams from aircraft passing overhead, and it might show me those. But if I get like a PVS or a PAS 50 or something like that, that's
Yeah.
an actual military
A
grade.
hiss.
Yes,
Yeah.
if I get a hiss, I can see the thermal, contrails from aircraft that are like 30,000 feet up.
Yeah, 100%. The truth is, all thermal imagers are not created equal. And the one on the government helicopter or the military sniper rifle isn't just more sensitive or higher resolution because it's those things too. It's not just that much better than your I'm gonna AGM or infrared. There's a bunch of those brands. I'm not gonna pick on any particular one of them. They all have their merit, um, but they aren't even operating within the same wavelength. And we talked about this a little bit before that there's a couple of different wavelengths that thermal imagers operate on. And all of those scopes you're going to buy for sub 10,000 bucks, they are all going to operate in that long wave uh, thermal spectrum, which has some unique characteristics. But all the government helicopter FLIR balls and a lot of the stuff on the big drones, those are operating in midwave and they see different things and they say they see through thin film materials a lot better than that other wavelength. That's just the fact. So here's the science kind of behind why Mylar fails as this thermal cloaking device. There's a conduction problem. The second that Mylar touches your clothes or your skin, it heats up because of conduction. It will immediately heat up. And because Mylar is so thin, it's a thin film, it reaches your body temperature almost instantly. And once that blanket warms up, it begins emitting its own IR signature. And to a thermal imager, you stop looking like a human shape and you start looking like a giant glowing rectangle pretty quick. So even if you can hide yourself behind, like a big piece of tinfoil or something, sure. But then you're just going to look like a big reflective piece of tinfoil running around. So there's not this magic stealthiness. You also get something called the chimney effect. And heat is stubborn, man. It wants to rise. And actually, not because it's hot, because it's less dense and we have gravity. But unless you are hermetically sealed in a mylar bag and you're not touching the sides, oh, and by the way, you'd suffocate, your body heat will eventually escape through those gaps and you'll see those plumes coming up in the air, unfortunately. So that's just the biggest issue is you really you're either going to be very reflective, which is going to look anomalous, and you can see that anomaly, or you're immediately going to pass your energy through that thin film material and it's going to conduct and you're going to start looking warm. You're either going to look like this warm person anywhere you're touching that thin film material, or you're going to look like a big warm rectangle. So
Interesting.
yeah, and that's the problem with a lot of this is you create this sort of I don't know, this unnatural kind of shimmer and it creates anomalies and you can just see them. And that's just the problem is the way heat energy transfers. It doesn't transfer the way you want it to. So um, you emit energy in a way that is going to pass through tarps and the black contractor bag and the mylar space blanket. It's just going to pass right through it, especially for any quality thermal optic. So what actually works, we did talk about this a little bit. What actually works, if you want to reduce your thermal footprint, you don't need a space blanket. You need thermal mass and you need airflow. So having a barrier between you, having this air gap is really what you need. A heavy wool blanket or uh, like some of those big thermal blankets they use in foundries and things like that, that is going to keep your heat from passing through and then you could use something like Mylar on the other side of that once you have that air gap, and it will reflect some of that heat energy. But we talked about this a little bit. If you look and see what they're using in Ukraine right now to not get spotted by these Russian drones that are equipped with thermal, they're using these big insulating coats, like these big thermal coats, and then they're hiding like their face and their eyes and their breath. And they're just trying to remain unanomalous because if you put something that blocks thermal up, you're generally not going to blend into the background. So it's this very intricate give and take of you don't want to block your thermal totally. You just want to totally blend into the background. And that again depends on your background. We're literally talking about like thermodynamic gray man right now.
You brought up a very, very interesting point about like the foundry blankets because we talked about that before, and I've seen the Ukrainian soldiers basically wearing welding jackets
Yeah.
that are full of mesothelioma and
Yep.
asbestos.
Just nothing but asbestos. Now that would actually work. The problem is that anywhere your air comes out, anywhere that 98.6-degree breath comes out is going to warm up. So you have to have a way to deal with that. But yeah, you're right. Like the big welding blankets, that's probably the best way. And we actually did some testing and we posted a video of this, Chris. So that's on our YouTube where I happen to have access to very expensive thermal imagers, and I took both the long wave thermal imager that you would get in a hunting type scope that you might buy for around 10 or 20,000 bucks, and then I took a mid wave thermal optic that you might see in a helicopter or a predator drone or something like that, and I put them side by side and did the mylar blanket and the big heavy dinar, like 1,000 dinar tarp or whatever, and then a black contractor bag. And you can see how quickly using all of those things, energy just passes through in seconds. And so we have that video. we can post that on our blog. But yeah, we have the evidence for this one. We have physical evidence. We've done the testing ourselves, and using a Mylar space blanket to hide from thermal is like trying to hide from a flashlight by holding up a mirror or a mesh bag.
So you're not disappearing, you're just changing how the light goes
That's
around
what it
you, right?
is. You're just changing how the little photons bounce around. That's all you're doing. But it doesn't work, man. I hope that's busted. But we have a video of this we can share. And yeah, that myth just doesn't work.
Well, I I think we're probably ready to move on to our last one, but I hope
Okay.
everybody is getting something out of this. We're actually doing research and we're actually testing things to give you solid, actionable intelligence, not just reading from Wikipedia.
Yeah, I hope so far you agree with us, or at least you've given it a second thought if you were in one of these hardcore dug-in camps about one of these arguments. I hope we're giving you a little bit of ammunition to say, okay, maybe that makes sense. And if you are someone who already didn't believe these myths, maybe we're giving you a little bit of information to help bust them when your friends bring them up. But so this is the last one. What's the last big myth that just will not die that made it all the way to the bitter end?
Well, this is probably one of the most polarizing myths out there, and we are definitely going to get some hate for it. But we're still going to talk about precious metals.
Oh, sure.
Many people believe that precious metals are this terrible investment for a prepper, and this whole discussion is kind of timely given the amount of fluctuation we've seen in gold and silver markets lately. Because over the past couple of months, it has just been wild roller coaster rides up and down and up
Yeah.
and down and up and down.
Yep.
And I know you probably do as well, AC. I own a little bit of gold, a little bit of silver. If and you've got some too. So we have a
Sure.
little bit of a dog in the fight,
Little
but
bit.
neither one of us have this Scrooge McDuck style money bin full of gold bullion that we can, jump into. So we're going to be pragmatic about this argument. Let's break this one down. In the prepping world, gold and silver are oftentimes very polarizing. You have one camp that treats a 1 ounce gold eagle like a holy relic, and another camp that says you can't eat gold, so it's worthless,
Yep.
right?
Yep. The only precious metals I invest in are lead and brass.
Yeah. And okay, okay, that's you have your ammo supply, and I know where to restock after you have nothing left. But if you believe precious metals are a terrible investment because they'll be worthless in a total SHTF scenario, you're likely falling into the all or nothing fallacy. You're prepping for the end of the world, but you aren't prepping for the end of the month or the end of a currency. And this is where it gets very, very specific. Here's why gold and silver are essential tools for the grounded prepper. The economic insurance versus barter distinction. The most common mistake is thinking you'll use gold to buy a loaf of bread during a riot. You probably won't, but in the middle of an acute crisis, liquidity like water, food, ammo, even American greenbacks are king. If you have something to trade with or barter with, you're better off. However, precious metals serve a different purpose: wealth preservation. Think about hyperinflation. When currency loses 10% of the value every week, gold doesn't go up in value. It simply stays the same while paper becomes trash. So that $100 bill that's now only worth $90 versus that 1 ounce of gold is still worth 1 ounce of gold. And there's even this re entry strategy that some people will talk about. Most SHTF events are temporary or regional. They're not global. Most of them aren't even nationwide. So when the dust settles and a new currency is established, gold is that bridge to get back into the new economy. So if it is a global or national collapse, you still have something to get into that new economy, whatever it is. If it's duck bills and Yeti coolers are the new currency, you have gold to get at least a couple of them. And saying that gold and silver will be worthless when society collapses ignores the fact that Roman gold and silver coins still have value today, thousands of years after the fall of Rome,
Right.
right?
Yeah, that's right. And the Byzantines, and you can go on, that any of those fallen societies, their silver and gold coins were not worthless after that society fell, right?
Yeah, exactly. And someplace I read there was a couple that purchased a house and they were cleaning out the house and they ended up finding a Nazi stamped gold bar in the attic that had been brought back and smuggled back into the US, um, and then lost to time and forgotten about. Well, they ended up donating it because of
Right.
what it was, but
Right.
that's still worth a lot of money.
Yeah, even though the entire regime fell, it was still worth a ton of money.
And we can look at other historical examples of gold as a lifeline. As I mean, history is littered with people who survived because they had portable, universally recognized wealth. Have you ever heard of the Vietnam boat people around the 70s?
I don't think so, no.
So, a lot of refugees fleeing Vietnam escaped from their country by paying for passage on boats, specifically with tails, which taels. They're thin 24 karat gold sheets, almost like um, a little bit thicker gold foil,
Okay.
right? Paper currency was basically garbage. You were going to get more out of starting a fire with it than you were purchasing power. But these tails, they used that gold and bought their freedom and a new life in the West with that gold. And before that, in the Weimar Republic, Germany, 1923. So as the German mark became so worthless that people literally burned it for heat, those holding gold or silver could buy entire city blocks or businesses for just a handful of coins. And that's where you start to develop a wealth gap. And if you have some of that in your prep, you're going to be better off as everything collapses around you. Looking at more recent history, modern Venezuela and Zimbabwe, and without getting into the politics of the United States launching an attack and taking out Maduro, their currency just absolutely collapsed. There was more value in the black market for things like toilet paper and diapers than there was for cocaine and other drugs. That's saying something
It's
because of that
crazy.
hyperinflation. Um, citizens in collapsed economies have used gold flakes or silver jewelry to buy basic necessities like medicine, fuel. Anytime the local currency fails, you've got this known amount of wealth. And a lot of people think that that stuff is only, the only logical investment. Let's call it the guns and cows fallacy, if you will. If your only investments are lead and livestock, you're not a prepper, you're a hoarder with a security detail. Let's just solve that. Food and defense are the foundation of any off grid homestead. We know that. They have massive downsides as investments, though. Portability. You can't put a cow in your pocket if a wildfire or a flood or an invading force requires you to leave your land in 10 minutes, right? Gold is condensed wealth. Maintenance. Cows require feed, water, vet care. Guns require maintenance. They take up space. Gold sits in a hole or a safe. It requires 0 calories to maintain and it doesn't even rust. So,
Right.
got that going for you. And then Divisibility. Try spending a tenth of a cow to buy a tank of gas, right? Silver junk coins, these are like the pre 1964 US dimes and quarters. They're perfect for small scale transactions without needing to slaughter your primary food source. If I give you four 1956 quarters, you know that that has an inherent value more than just a dollar, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And thinking gold is useless because you can't eat it, that's kind of like thinking of fire extinguishers useless because you can't drink it. It's a specialized tool. You can't apply everything the same logic to everything every time. So if you have no gold or silver, you're betting 100% that the current financial system will either last forever or disappear completely. And history suggests the most likely scenario is something in the middle. It'll be this long, painful period of economic decay where sound money is the only thing that's really there anymore. And
Yeah.
I like the combi bars. They're 50-gram little itty bitty credit card size bars of gold or silver, and they're pre perforated, so you can break off 1 gram at a time.
Yeah.
I really like those, and they're not cheap. 50 grams of gold is going to run you. i- This is this is not something that you're just going to toss money at and say I'm good to go. You need to do your research on it, but I really like the gold and silver combi bars because you can snap off a gram of gold and use that as currency, and you still have the rest of it.
Yeah, and I like what you say, like the whole all or nothing fallacy, because that's a lot of people. They're like, oh yeah, I precious metals are gonna be useless uh, in an SHTF situation. But are you saying that you don't have like a 401k or like a bank account? Because the truth is that any of that stuff is going to be worthless before gold and silver. And so that's what I just don't understand when you get that argument from people. Are the people that say gold and silver are a bad investment because in the end of the world they'll be worthless. Do those people not have any other investments at all besides the beans and bullets and cows? Is that it? Like I just think that's crazy.
I honestly don't know because I mean, maybe beans and rice. Um, they might have all of their investment tied up in a bunker under the house, but then you're just stuck in your bunker.
Yeah, I think there's just has to be a hedge, and that's the way I always look at precious metals, is they're a hedge. I'm not very heavily invested in precious metals, but I do have some for like what you said in that acute disaster where maybe you just do need uh, a known a known article of wealth to get by, to trade with someone. So, and it's interesting looking kind of the history of gold because gold and silver they weren't always alternatives. I think it was Egypt, like, I don't know, 4,000 years ago when some pharaoh said, you know what? It's pretty and it's shiny and it's rare. That's going to be our new currency. But ever since then, it's still been shiny and pretty and rare. But now they have industrial uses. Now they actually consume them in our day-to-day life. They use them to make things. They're in your cell phone, they're in your computers, they're in all that stuff. So we are actually consuming gold, and as much as they mine precious metals and create more of them, we actually are consuming them as well. They do have intrinsic value. They're not just pretty and shiny and rare, they're used for things within our society. So I think it's fair to say that even if you're gambling on a complete Teotihuacan event, that someday when society does come back and somebody's got to build a circuit board, they're going to need that gold.
Exactly. And there is a way to reclaim gold from old circuit boards. And if you've got a computer repair facility or a computer repair shop in your neck of the woods, go and ask it to see their junk boards because they're literally burned out circuit boards and they
Yeah.
have no more value as a circuit board. if you want to take a look at the science behind it, you can actually extract the gold from that. And some people actually make a decent living doing that. They'll pay
Yeah.
$10 for 100 pounds worth of circuit boards and get
Yeah.
half an ounce of gold.
I have seen that people will, yeah, they will recycle the precious metals. And that actually brings up a good point. We talk about precious metals. And again, we're not selling gold coins here. I mean, this is just us trying to bust a myth. But um if you are going to be a precious metals person, if you do plan on bartering with that, you can get these little like acid etch tests on Amazon. Because if you do want to trade that, if you do plan to use precious metals as some kind of barter system in a grid down scenario, you probably want to know if it's real gold or not. And there's these little, I think it's called an acid etch test, but you basically just kind of scratch it on a piece of sandpaper and add something to it. And if it turns blue, then it's gold or whatever. But having a way to verify that it is a precious metal. When you buy and sell precious metals, they have a far more expensive piece of technology that actually, it's like a mass spectrometer type thing. You set it on it and it verifies the weight and then it tries to shoot light into it or something. And you can buy those too. If you're somebody that's like very heavy into this, that might make sense to you. I think those machines are very expensive, but having a way to verify that it is a precious metal, if that's something that you're going to be, if you're going to be using gold and silver in some kind of grid down scenario. But yeah, Chris, I think that you have sufficiently busted that it does have value. Whether you want that value or not, I mean, I'm not saying go out and buy gold and silver. That's the last thing I'm saying. I'm simply saying that it's a silly argument to say that gold and silver will be worthless in some kind of SHTF scenario because we've had very significant historical Teotihuacan type events. And those gold and silver coins were still worth something. They still had inherent and intrinsic value after those societies fell.
I completely agree. So I think we have successfully busted 8 myths in 2 episodes. What do you think?
I think so. I feel good about busting all of these, but I would like to hear from people. If we made a point that you disagree with, or if there is something that we missed that you think deserves a place in the conversation, I would like to know how you think we did when it comes to these myths. But these were the 8, and like I said at the beginning of last episode, to recap this, we went out to the socials and started asking people. And there's one particular very big Facebook group that we interact with a lot that has like 450,000 people. And we asked people, what are the big prepper myths and which ones do you wish would just die? And it was interesting because we got stuff like, the tampon, or people's like, tampon the bullet wound, man, that's got to die. And then you'd have a handful of people that would say, no, it's got value. That's the tampon, the bullet wound. There's times when that makes sense. And same thing with the gold. I think the precious metal one was the one that was the most polarizing. I think that's the one where you had people on both sides of the argument almost equally. Everybody was like, no, gold and silver are a stupid investment, regardless of what it costs, because in the fall of society, it's going to be worthless and you're better off buying bullets.
Exactly. And that's just not the case. So I think we've effectively put all of these to bed. Join us next week because we're going to take a completely new direction. And then episode 80 is going to be awesome.
We've got a big name. We got a pretty decent big name for episode 80. So I am looking forward to that conversation. I don't think we're going to tease it just yet, but yeah, at 80 we're gonna have a big name, and we've been doing pretty good about this, bringing guests on every 5 episodes or so, and I think it provides kind of a different perspective. Although I will say, like talking to Brad or talking to Sam at Mad Gear, it's amazing how many of these people that I would call professionals, even more professional than us, that without any conversation beforehand or coaching, they are on the exact same track as us. It's the same exact mindset. They say the exact same things that you and I have been saying, and actually very refreshing. I'm like, oh, okay, well maybe we're not idiots. Like this is kind of cool. Like you guys, like Sam's like a pro, right? That guy flew on the Doomsday plane, and the stuff he said about the EMP is kind of the exact same stuff we have been saying about the EMP without flying on the Doomsday plane.
Exactly. We're still probably considered idiots, but just not in that
Sure.
aspect.
Yeah, no, that was refreshing. So anyway, yeah, why don't you wrap this one up?
Yeah, come back next week. And until then, remember, you are your own stakeholder. We'll see you then.